No power greater than X.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to the 7th episode of the Crossroads, celebrating 20 years of the Xbox brand. My name is Ryan Turford, and this is the show where we're counting down the months to the 20-year anniversary of the original Xbox with 50 of the best games to play on the console for both new and experienced owners. We dive into the brief history of each game and talk about what makes them awesome. As always, we'd love your feedback on this and all of our shows over on Twitter at the Xbox Drive, or you can reach out to me directly anytime at Ryan Turford. Now, LucasArts, I know we just talked about it on the show this week with all the big LucasArts news. Again, this was not planned. This just happens to be where it falls on the list. Obviously, the LucasArts brand has always been really synonymous with Xbox. Actually, going back to the original Xbox, there were almost 20 releases on the original Xbox from LucasArts, in particular, that ranged from licensed titles like the Star Wars games or Indiana Jones and the Emperor's Tomb to stuff like Mercenaries or a whole bunch of different like weird games like Armed and Dangerous in particular comes to mind when I think about LucasArts games that are kind of out there. But they were actually a huge publisher of games on the original Xbox. Lots of games came from LucasArts. Again, some good, like Knights of the Old Republic or the game that we're going to talk about today. Some really good, like Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, or some other games, or the really bad, like Star Wars Obi-Wan. There was a range in quality, and there was a bunch of different developers involved. It wasn't just the LucasArts team that was the core team itself. It was a whole bunch of different developers, including today's, because this one's actually coming to us from Traveler's Tales Games. We're going to talk about Lego Star Wars, the OG Lego Star Wars on the original Xbox. Now, there were actually 2 Lego Star Wars games on the original Xbox. There was this one, which was the first one, which we're going to talk about today. But then we also had Lego Star Wars 2, the original trilogy, which actually came out a little bit later. Both these games are fantastic. Obviously, I do think the second one actually definitely learned some lessons from the first one and improved things a little bit. But honestly, I think they're both great. The main reason why we're not talking about this one on the list, though, is because I do think the 360 version of Lego Star Wars 2 is a little bit better. But we're going to stick with the original Lego Star Wars today, which kind of crazily kicked off this whole Lego craze in particular. We had Lego games before Lego Star Wars, the original, but we didn't really have like licensed Lego games. We had a couple like Harry Potter kind of building games that were, I think, on Windows and a couple other platforms. But other than that, there were Lego games like Lego Racers and stuff like that. But this was the first time really that Lego licensed a property like Star Wars and actually turned it into an actual video game and tried to make more of an actual video game out of it rather than just like a virtual representation of Lego blocks, which I think was just a really novel concept. Again, since we had so many Star Wars games by the time this came out, we had seen Star Wars games of all types. We had racing games, we had flying games, we had a fighting game in Terras Kasai, and I mean, lots of third and first person shooters and third and first person action games. And Lego Star Wars, even though, again, when you look at the Lego brand nowadays, some people feel like the Lego brand is kind of done to death in video games, but back then, this was just such a breath of fresh air for Star Wars in general, for Star Wars games, because it was so different from everything that Star Wars had actually done in gaming before that. It really just changed things for Star Wars and kind of created this own little genre of games and kind of basically created this whole series that still perpetuates to this day with a new Lego Star Wars game this year, kind of rebooting kind of all of the takes on Star Wars from the first 9 films in the Star Wars saga, or at least I should say the episode 1 through 9, not the first 9 films, because otherwise that would include Rogue One and Solo, which it doesn't have. But so it's actually really interesting to see kind of how the Lego series has evolved, because in a lot of ways it really hasn't. And the winning formula that is found in a lot of Lego games all comes back down to this game, and I'm going to tell you why right now. The story in Lego Star Wars follows the same plot as the 3 prequel films, giving you 6 levels from each film, highlighting 6 sections from each movie. The game also released 1 month before Revenge of the Sith did in theaters, so if you played the game at launch, it would effectively spoil the movie for you, although I would argue you can't really spoil a prequel because you already kind of know how it's going to turn out, especially one like Star Wars, where you knew, like, you got like little hints of certain events, like the Clone Wars and stuff like that, but you didn't actually know what they were. but you kind of know the end result of Anakin's journey. So I mean, I don't know how much the game could really spoil for Revenge of the Sith, but obviously there were certain plot points that happened in the movie itself that you did do in the game itself, and it did spoil it a little bit for you. Unlike the modern LEGO licensed games, this one did not contain any voice work, however, and instead tells its story using pantomiming with the LEGO characters, which essentially means that it's going to do all of the actions non-verbally to you and basically try and convey the entire story of these Star Wars movies without a spoken word of dialogue, which is a tricky thing to do. It is definitely not easy to be able to use your actions to basically convey all of that everything that happened in Star Wars, again, these first 3 films, which is just a crazy undertaking. And again, they did that for the sequel as well. For Lego Star Wars 2, it was the same deal. It wasn't really until I think Lego The Hobbit, or Lego Lord of the Rings, that was the first game that actually had voices from a movie, and they basically pulled them straight from the movie. It actually, like, when I first played Lego Lord of the Rings, it was really jarring to play it with the voices because I was so used to the Lego games up until that point with no voices in it. And now it's kind of like the reverse when you go back and play these games, because I mean, you're so used to the voices, the real voices in the Lego games now, that it's weird to go back and play it without them. But honestly, I actually think there's like a certain charm to it. While it may be jarring to look at today, it's interesting looking back on a game and seeing just how well they were able to convey these stories of these movies without saying a single word. It's also peppered with humorous moments throughout, and while some of these can be a bit slapstickish, for the most part, many of these jokes actually stick the landing, with a great blend of jokes that appeal both to children and adults, very similarly to Pixar films or DreamWorks films. Traveler's Tales also did a good job of choosing which moments from each movie to cover and balancing it so that none of them really overstay their welcome or anything like that. And you can finish all 3 movies in about 7 to 8 hours too. And one of the things I like about this game too is that you're not just running around on foot, you're getting into vehicles. You've got like almost like Star Fox-esque like on rails segments where you're flying starships around or traveling around in vehicles. Like you have a wide variety of different things that you're doing in this game. And again, it really just helps break up the pacing and kind of never feels like you're just kind of bogged down, like hacking and slashing and kind of button mashing your way through it. Like it was really well thought out. And I think the game is very well paced. And that's one of the reasons why I think it actually holds up really well, even though we've gotten so many great modern Lego games. If you ever want to go back and visit the prequel trilogy in Lego form, like the original Lego Star Wars game still holds up great. Like it's still a fantastic story. It's still very well paced. And again, that's just a testament to their design all the way back in April of 2005, which again, just was so long ago. Gameplay should feel familiar to you if you've played any Lego game before. You'll punch, shoot, and lightsaber your way through each level, collecting studs, building objects to solve puzzles, and then fighting the occasional boss battle. You'll also be purchasing and unlocking new characters from throughout the Star Wars universe, each of which with their own ability that will allow you to progress through specific areas. And again, some of these abilities are shared between characters, but it does really add like a lot of replay value to the game. It gives you reasons to go back and play each level with different characters, or like in free play mode where you've unlocked like 30 or 40 different characters with like all of the different abilities that you need to do to get through all of the locked doors, and then kind of see everything in this game. Again, there's a lot to see and do in the original Lego Star Wars, and as I mentioned, in about 7 to 8 hours, you can finish just the game baseline, but then there's a lot of reasons to go back to this game. As I mentioned before, Lego Star Wars kicked off the Lego formula that we all know and love today, and even though it's received small tweaks with future iterations, I was really surprised when we were visiting this game for the purposes of this podcast that the gameplay felt just like current Lego games. Like I didn't feel like I missed a beat or anything like that. It didn't feel frustrating in any way. And it really felt like I was just revisiting an old friend, or basically like playing the prequel trilogy in a separate game that happens to also play exactly the same as everything I'm used to now. Again, we've seen little tweaks with the modern Lego games. Like they're actually a little bit more complex now, more than anything. Whereas this one's just a little bit more simple, but other than that, it just feels just the same as any of the modern Lego games. It's pick up and play in all the right ways and can easily be enjoyed by gamers of all skill levels and ages, especially like if you've got a family, like let's say you're a father or a mother who wants to introduce their child to a video game of some kind. Honestly, the Lego games are a great place to start. Again, the content itself is not mature or anything like that. And it's all just about having fun. Like Traveler's Tales really like kind of made it their motto, I think, from the beginning, to just make the gameplay as fun as possible. It kind of reminds me in a lot of ways of my old school arcade machines that I've got back here, except without the arcade style difficulty, where again, it's very like, not necessarily button mashy, but very, very simplistic in its game design. And it's all about just having fun and kind of keeping you engaged and entertaining you. And that's just kind of how I felt about all the Lego games in particular. I'm actually a really big fan of the Lego games. And as someone who loves complex game mechanics, this couldn't be farther from that. But if you're someone who has never played the Star Wars games the Lego games before, and again, you've got like a younger person who wants to get into video games, or if you've got like a significant other who's never really gotten into video games, like this and Mario Kart are kind of my two recommendations for anyone who's never played video games before to kind of get their first start. Like I think the Lego games are a great basis for anyone who's new to video games in general to start with. But I think they're also just as fun for anyone who's been playing for a long time like me. Like any good Lego game, Lego Star Wars truly shines, though, when you play it with a friend in local co-op. However, Traveler's Tales did a great job of balancing the game when you're playing alone, so it doesn't feel as though you're at any type of disadvantage. Each level features multiple objectives that are triggered by both players doing different things at the same time, and the AI actually does a surprisingly good job performing the needed action in order to progress, removing moments of frustration that it could have definitely mounted if they didn't actually implement this feature correctly. I mean, as someone who traditionally mostly plays his games by himself, I can attest to this, where a lot of times games that are fundamentally designed for multiple players in mind, but you can still play solo, a lot of times they don't really balance the game so it's just as easy to perform all the actions that you need to when you're solo versus when you're playing with people. The good example being Marvel's Avengers, where it's a fantastic game, but until they released later patches that kind of fixed this, you basically had to like strong arm every single objective in that particular game. Like when you'd go to an area and you'd have to hold 3 control points, the other AI characters wouldn't hold any of the control points. It would be up to you against like all the AI troops. So it was just like pulling your hair out, inducing maddening, versus a game like Lego Star Wars, which just, again, made it simple, easy, and fun. And that's the main thing that I'm going to continue to hammer about this game is that, yes, it's not too complex. Again, for someone who wants like deep gameplay of their games, this is not their game. But if you want a fun pick up and play game, especially in local co-op, I mean, Lego Star Wars, you can't go wrong with Lego Star Wars. It is super fun. Now, if you're looking to pick up Lego Star Wars today, it is available backwards compatible on Xbox 360. It is not backwards compatible with Xbox One or Series X or anything like that. But if you do have a 360, it totally plays fine, as well as its sequel. So if you want, you can actually pick them both up. However, with Lego Star Wars 2, as I mentioned earlier, probably want the 360 version, because even though it's not like a huge graphical improvement, number one, you got achievements in that. So, I mean, right there, it's kind of worth getting that version of the game. Plus, it's available digitally, so you don't have to hunt down a physical copy for it. But ultimately, I mean, even if you don't have a 360 right now and you have just an OG Xbox, both of these are still great pickups for your original Xbox. And again, fairly cheap games. You can get these for like $4 or $5. That's all for this episode of The Crossroads. You can hit me up on Twitter anytime at Ryan Turford. You also find the Pantsman himself on Twitter at Sean Capri, or us on Twitter at The Xbox Drive. Thank you so much for watching or listening to this episode of The Crossroads, and we out. Bye.